Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about Commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my fantastic co-host. He's really looking forward to the upcoming set Lorwyn Eclipsed, and of course its upcoming sequels, Lorwyn Breaking Dawn and Lorwyn New Moon. It's Dana Roach. Hey Dana.
I'm always kind of bugged this time of year when I start watching zombie movies and they just like moan and groan instead of speaking a language like Latin, because it's, you know, a dead language.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's the best possible joke to tell me, a bona fide zombie player. Like, now whenever I play my Will Help deck, I have to like always talk in Latin and stuff. That's hilarious, Dana. I'm going to use that. I really am.
The best reason to actually learn Latin.
Yes, yeah. Revive that dead language. That's the true mark of a necromancer right there.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Okay. Well, Dana, it's you and I on this show. We're talking about some SALT scores. The SALT votes have concluded. The community has weighed in as they do every single year over there on EDHREC with the SALT voting. We got 1.8 million votes this year, and we've got a lot of data to get through, including a couple of new things that we've never analyzed before in the SALT scores.
Yeah, 1.8 million. I was kind of shocked at that number. That's a lot of people voting on salty cards. That's insane.
Yeah, this is a whole lot of fun. We've got a bunch of new stuff to go over, and as people can probably tell from the title of this video, one that I'm especially interested to get to is which sets do people resonate with the most, or in this case, what we can measure the least? Which sets do they not like? But also, where are things at? What are the new, quote, most hated cards in the format? We'll go over the new results there, including the saltiest brand new cards that didn't exist in the votes over the previous years. And of course, check in with like the unbanned cards and how Game Changers are doing in the SALT scores, how the SALT is trending overall. We've got a bunch of data to throw at people, so this is going to be a really exciting episode. First things first, though, let's just, starting off with something simple, getting our bearings here, let's take a look at the new top saltiest cards of the year according to all of our new data. Let's get acquainted with all of that.
So in looking at this list of the top 15 saltiest cards, I mean, this looks pretty similar to previous iterations of this list. Like, nothing's really changed necessarily, except at number 3, a new contender has emerged.
Very much. Yeah, this all basically looks exactly the same. Stasis, Winter Orb, Tergrid, Rhystic Study famously have been amongst the top 10, the top 15, the top 20 saltiest cards in the format for years and years, and that is true of a whole bunch of the other big favorites here. Armageddon, Destroying All Lands, Grand Arbiter, Smothering Tide, like, these are the usual suspects, if you will. But Vivi Orniteer is at number 3 with a SALT score of 2.8 out of 4. A wild Vivi Orniteer has been found. I thought that Vivi's score would be high. I did not think it would be this high.
Yes, I was expecting it to be high, but I was not expecting like top 15, let alone number 3. That's pretty impressive, considering it's a card that's like been out for 5 months ish. I mean, like that's something. I don't know what it is, but it's something.
There is sort of just an impulse bit that these polls are measuring every year. I would wager that Vivi Orniteer represents something of that ilk, where Magic players can be in some ways a little bit reactive, and Vivi is very famous right now. Vivi's very talked about. I would be personally surprised if this score maintains itself exactly where it is next year. I suspected that it might start to ease down ever so slightly, but right now Vivi is on the tip of everyone's tongues, so it became a big ticket item.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some hype to it for sure, and probably splash damage from like how heavily it's impacted other formats as well.
Yeah,
I think like people who have like had their, you know, standard or modern formats taken over by this card probably feel some frustration, even if they haven't run into it in EDH necessarily. So there's a whole bunch of factors like propping this card up and making it really salty. And I definitely could see some of that ease back, particularly if you see things in other formats lessen its impact, you know, removing other cards that prop it up and make it very strong in standard or modern or something. I could see it ease back, as well as the factor of a lot of times a commander comes out of the gate and is really impactful and strong like this, and people get bored of it or whatever their motivation is, or the saltiness makes people not want to play against it, so they like take the deck apart. Yeah. So yeah, I this will not be number 3 next year. I almost guarantee it, just for a combination of all those reasons. Not to say it's not a salty card, but like
it's very powerful.
Yeah, a lot of things that have pushed up to number 3 right now are going to fade away a little bit.
It's so funny because if we look at last year's results, Nadu Winged Wisdom was actually in this exact spot at number 3 last year. So I think that there is sort of just this cultural agreement amongst all of us. It's just like, hey, when Wizards releases a super pushed, uber powerful commander, we all do kind of recognize like, hey, yo, this is a lot, actually. This seems like a way of players expressing that particular version of a frustration. So that's what I take away from here. If you are playing Vivi Ornithir out there, I just be prepared for people to perceive it as a deeply powerful card, because that is true. It absolutely is a deeply powerful card. It is one of those things, yet another blue including 3 mana commander that gives you a whole lot of value, much in the vein of Nadu, apparently. So it's funny that we have that spot reserved there in the Salt Scores.
Right, yeah. So we'll see what sits in that slot next year, if that's where, Cyclops from the new X-Men set winds up dropping it, or Michelangelo from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something. Like, I wonder what winds up there next year.
Yeah, so sort of just getting our bearings here. We did kind of breeze by a whole lot of these, but again, they are a lot of the usual suspects. If you want to see the full list of the new saltiest cards of the 2025 Salt polls, you can go to edhrec.com/top/salt, and you can see all of the new stuff, and of course, check out the previous year's results as well. But for now, that gets our bearings here with our new top scorers, but there's also a lot of other data that we are going to get into, including my personal favorite data that we've newly drawn this year, which are the saltiest sets of the year too. That's a really big one. I'm excited to get to it. Real quick though, I am kind of a tease here, sorry, but we've got some shout outs to do before we get into even more of this salty data.
We are excited to be teamed up with Dragon Shield. MagicCon Atlanta a few weeks back marked the release of Dragon Shield's first licensed Magic the Gathering product, starting with an exclusive Dracogenesis sleeve from the Tarkir Dragonstorm set. And we got to see sleeves featuring EDHREC's most popular commander, the Ur-Dragon, as well as arts from each of these Shocklands and Ravnica Guild sleeves coming in 2026. Use the promo code EDHREC in all lowercase at dragonshield.com to get 5% off your next order. It helps the show and it helps your decks stay safe with Dragon Shield.
This show is also brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/EDHRECast. This show could not happen without you. And to show our thanks, we have great perks over there, including access to our Discord where you can chat with us, maybe find a game, or access to the Challenge to Stats spreadsheet showing all of our challenges over the years, plus some exclusive content too. And if you want to support us in totally free ways, you can do that as well. Hit those like buttons, subscribe to see even more cool data that we're showing off here, and leaving a podcast review is huge. And one final thing, in every episode, we like to shout out one of our fantastic patrons. So this week, give it up for Andrew Nieto. Andrew, cheers to you. Thank you for being a patron. You make this show possible.
Yes, Andrew, we really need you.
Wow.
To be thankful that Matt wasn't here to make an even worse joke than the one I just did.
That's so silly. Also, as a heads up, I'm going to be at the Command Fest in Tacoma on October 31st. Yes, that's right. I will be at a Magic event on Halloween. There's an event in Tacoma from the 31st to November 2nd. That's going to be at the Tacoma Convention Center for 3 days of Magic. They're also doing some stuff for Flesh and Blood, Riftbound, Disney Lorcana, Warhammer, things like that. It's hosted by Laughing Dragon. It's always a really fun time. I've enjoyed it every single year. So in case you want to maybe come say hi, you can find me at the Command Fest there in Tacoma.
All right, should we take a look at the saltiest sets this time?
Yes, let's get to it. The most hated sets. So the way that we drew this data, again, we have those 1.8 million votes from a whole bunch of different cards, but cards that were originally printed in a certain set, we averaged all of those things together and then compared all of the sets from there. And the results are pretty darn interesting. Let's get them up on screen. As a heads up, this is not including any reprints of stuff. We know that can affect something. We'll touch on it a little bit later on in just a minute here. But for now, let's figure out what's going on with the sets that people don't like and see if we can notice any trends amongst these most hated sets. Dana, I know that one thing stuck out to me real fast when I started looking over this list. What about you?
Yeah, it seems to me folks maybe hate Secret Lairs and like Universes Beyond kind of stuff more than they hate the traditional Magic set.
It's a little bit silly. So I'll just go down the list here. All of the exact numbers will be on screen. But the top 15 on our list here, we've got the Jurassic World collection at spot number 1, the Transformers cards right after it, Secret Lair drops as a category. And again, we're not including reprints here, so only new cards from these sets. Then followed by Commander 2017, Commander Masters, Doctor Who, Commander 2013, Alpha and Unlimited.
Then Unfinity, Commander 2016, New Phyrexia, The Big Score, Marvel's Spider-Man, Commander 2020, and last but not least, Urza's Saga.
Those are our top 15. On average, all of the cards equate into these SALT scores that we're seeing on the right-hand side of the graph. And again, this is a whole lot of information to throw at you. But to give a little bit of sense of bearing here, the average SALT score is going to be somewhere closer to the 0.2 mark or so. And Urza Saga is showing 0.38. And that's, again, spot number 15. The highest SALT score here is 0.6 for the Jurassic World collection. Yeah. I was not ready to see Jurassic World at the top of that list, but there is certainly a commonality here. 5 of the sets that we just named are Universes Beyond types of things. So Jurassic, Transformers, Doctor Who, Spider-Man, and of course the Secret Layer cards. And we're again only counting the new cards from Secret Layer, so none of the reprints and stuff like that. So brand new stuff that comes in those. It seems like people have a little bit of an axe to grind when they were doing this year's polling.
I had forgotten Jurassic World collection existed.
Same.
I was not angry enough at it to have made it my saltiest set. So I was surprised to see quite a few of those on here, as well as just like Commander 2020 and sets like that. I was not expecting to see some of these. Some make sense. Unfinity. I get why folks found things like stickers frustrating, or the fact that some cards are Commander legal and some weren't. Or there's a lot of reasons why like you would find that to be very, very salty. And I guess Secret Layers in general, there's a situation where you can't always get them. I get why that makes people very frustrating too, when they feel like they don't have access to some of the cards.
The exclusivity, yeah.
But yeah, this was kind of eye-opening. And there's been a lot of discourse the last couple of weeks, especially about, since we've seen the roadmap for the rest of 2026,
right?
There's a lot of Universes Beyond stuff coming, and we're definitely seeing some pushback from the community in that regards, and the SALT scores here seem to reflect a little bit of that for sure.
This did feel to me a little bit like people were kind of expressing a frustration in a way that they can. That is, I think, what is resonating here to me, is that the Universes Beyond is sort of a big hot button topic right now for the engaged Magic community, and this felt like a way of sort of venting some of those frustrations, which I do understand. I have my own conflicting feelings about it. I know people who were really excited, like, oh my word, Jurassic cards, I love that dinosaur stuff. I know people who were over the moon about Doctor Who, and I certainly don't want to yuck anyone's yum, but I can see why a very actively online Magic audience, which is basically what we were polling here, right? The audience that we're polling here is people who are online enough to know what EDHREC is, and to know that we do SALT scores like this, and to want to participate in that game. That is not a reflection of the entire Magic playing population out there. I think this data is showing us some of the feelings or the predilections of that particular population of the Magic community, that one that is online enough to engage with those new sets and to see them coming, and to have certain feelings about Universes Beyond as a result of that. So interesting results.
I'm kind of curious, actually, Joey, as a little aside, do you find these to be salty? Like, you personally, is this the kind of thing, like, would you have voted for any of these? Would they have been on your list at all?
I wouldn't have. I don't think that even subconsciously I might have accidentally voted for, because I think that is the thing for us to point at here. I don't believe that the cards in the Transformer set necessarily, or the Doctor Who set, that the cards individually are what's to blame here. This feels to me like people had a knee-jerk response to seeing those things that are not Magic IP, and voting that way, as opposed to every single card in a Doctor Who set or whatever was actually powerful enough or frustrating to play against enough that mechanically, if it had been removed from that identity of being outside of Doctor Who or outside of Jurassic or whatever, I don't think that this is speaking to the mechanics of the cards. I think that this is speaking to the skinning of the cards, so to speak. And to that end, I don't personally have that reaction. So I don't think I would have voted in these results. I think I would have voted much more in the way that I feel about kind of any other set. It is telling to me that certain Universes Beyond sets do not show up in this top 15. Final Fantasy is way further down the list. Lord of the Rings is way further down the list. Final Fantasy is actually near the bottom of the list. People actually do really like some of those properties, but I think especially a few of these feel a little bit too close to home or too far away from the high fantasy setting that a lot of players like. That is the reason why these ones in particular line up here. How about you? Are these the kind of things that you would have voted high for, or?
So I'm not a huge fan of Universes Beyond, especially properties that don't look like traditional Magic. I like the high fantasy vibe as well. But I can kind of separate me not liking it from it being salty or a problem.
Sure.
Because I used this for an example on a recent show I did a guest spot on, but at MagicCon Atlanta, you had the Furby like the announcement of some of the Furby stuff they were doing. And there was a dance floor with a bunch of little kids dancing with like a Furby character. That's not for me, obviously, but like that's very cool for those little kids. And it's probably good for Magic long term to bring people in like that. So while I don't love a lot of this stuff too, it doesn't bother me as much because I feel like it's good. It's doing some good long term. It's like bringing in new fans, and like games need that. Like it's long term, it's going to be good for having a bunch of people that came in from Doctor Who and came into the game from, you know, Spider-Man or whatever it winds up being. So in my head, when I see one of these pop up, it despite me not liking it, I can kind of, it makes it a wash because I think there's some good that comes from these things. Versus like Unfinity, like I absolutely could have voted for Unfinity because I feel like that I have a tough time finding the upside. Like, well, I don't like it, but like it's bringing in some, like, I don't feel like it does that. It just annoyed me with stickers and having to figure out what cards worked where. And, you know, somebody's playing the attraction cards and I have to keep track of that. And so a couple of those make sense. On the whole, UB doesn't make me salty necessarily, no.
Yeah. I think as a quick point on the UB stuff you're mentioning, if it is bringing more players into the game, and I know a concern in a lot of the conversations around Universes Beyond is whether or not that tool actually does do that, or if it just becomes a collector's piece for people who are only interested in that IP and then they don't actually stick around and increase the population of Magic players and stuff like that. That is sort of its own whole big can of worms that ultimately would distract from the thing that I want to leap onto, which is what you just mentioned, Unfinity. I would have voted probably higher for the cards in Unfinity. I don't like the way that set was handled. And it's interesting to me, again, going back to this list of, the 15 sets that apparently across their entire population of cards, on average, their scores are higher than all of the other sets. Unfinity falls into one of those sets that to me just strikes me as like the way this set was released is the reason that people don't like it. It's not just that the Unfinity cards are slightly annoying because they tried to move Silver Border into Black Border, but this also feels to me a little bit like Commander Masters or The Big Score, where the ways that those sets came out and the stuff that was happening in the zeitgeist around them, you might say, felt a little bit like, don't like that, Wizards. Like The Big Score is such a travesty of a release as well. And Unfinity was manipulated away from its origins to try and appeal to people more. And it felt like we were therefore distanced from what we would have been able to enjoy about it had it been released in its original form. So yeah, there are a couple of things that feel in that vein where I would also probably be like, yeah, I didn't like Infinity. I'm going to vote a little bit higher on these cards, probably on average, just subconsciously, because I think the mess and the strings attached to its release are indeed so messy.
Or like Secret Lair, like if you waited in line in queue to get a Secret Lair product and like your browser crashed or it just sold out or something before you got a chance to get it, I absolutely get why you're like hammering that salt button on that kind of product for sure, because like that is a really salty moment to like have wasted a bunch of your time to then not get a product or something, or even if you got it, had to spend 2 hours in queue or something to actually get that order. So like those things 100%, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I didn't have to really deal with that because I don't really usually get Secret Lairs, but like, man, if I was somebody who was in that position, for sure, I understand.
Well, I mean, moving away from these sets where clearly the expressions of frustration are about like the way that the set was released or the certain things that it represents about the trends or the future of the Magic going forward. But now let's actually focus in on the other sets on this top 15 list that I think represent people's frustration with the cards mechanically within them. Not just like, the Unfinity of Silver Border became Black Border or the exclusivity of Secret Lairs, but we've got a bunch of other sets on this list too that I think can also be grouped into some different sections here. I think some of them are disliked because of the commanders in those sets, and some of them are disliked because of the cards that go into the 99 in those sets. So for instance, on this list, we're seeing Commander 2017, Commander 2013, and Commander 2016 are all amongst the top 15 sets that on average have a higher SALT score. There's a couple of things about the commanders of those sets that people will probably remember are pretty intense. Eminence commanders, for instance, from Commander 2017, or like Olero, Prosh, and Derevi from Commander 2013, or Dana, you might alone be responsible for the votes on Commander 2016 because that's the one that had partners in it, which is also kind of a touchy feeling for a lot of people.
Yeah, those are things that all felt very disruptive. In 2013 especially, that was the first year we had that gap. 2011 was the first Commander decks. There wasn't anything in 2012. And then during that window, Commander had really blown up. In 2013, people were struggling to get get those decks. I myself remember like getting up on Saturday mornings and like hitting big box stores around me because my LGS didn't have those in, and trying to like see if I happened to, there was a Kmart in town, or I'd hit a Walmart. Like I would hit like multiple stores trying to find those decks, and eventually got them from doing that. But you had to like go out of your way to find those. So sure, that there was a bunch of ways those are frustrating. I get that.
And what those commanders did and like pushed within the game as well. It feels to me like the salt scores on those commanders that they received just heightens up the average for the entire card pool of each of those sets. And again, we're only counting new cards within this data set here. We'll touch on that more in a moment.
Yeah, because it was at a point in time when there was so many less legends coming out that when a really strong one came out, like the Aloros or the Prashas or the Atraxas or the Eminence commanders, you saw those all the time too. Like those commanders were played constantly. Yeah. So if you found anything about them frustrating, you had to deal with it because, in a world where we're getting like 20 new legends a year, that's just such a small percentage of them that you are going to see that like you're just running into the problem once constantly in a way that you probably don't today necessarily.
Right, because we get 400 legends.
Right, exactly, yeah. Which is a problem maybe in its own way, but it's a different problem.
Quite. Going back to frustrations potentially with Universes Beyond, the number of legends has exploded. Yeah. Absolutely. But then I think this also speaks to the long-lasting impressions of those times as well. Partners remain CEDH staples. Partners are known to be very, very powerful. So it is not a surprise to me to see that Commander 2016 made its way into the top 15, quote, most hated sets. A little bit exaggerating on the title there, but still, just because partners have had such an impact and continue to have that impact too. Yeah. But those are just some of the sets here that we see that I think are disliked because of the commander specifically. Sets that are disliked because of the cards that go into 99 though. Here's some real meat that I find very interesting. A group here that I think all meet this description would be New Phyrexia, Commander 2020, Urza's Saga, and the combination here on this list is Unlimited/Alpha. Those are just sort of paired together because of a weird thing that happened in the voting. Don't worry about it. But yeah, all of those sets appear here. And I don't think this is because of any Legends or Universes Beyond of it. Like, that's not present in any of these. It just has to come down to what cards that go into the 99 are present in these sets. And when we start to answer that question, we're like, oh, I see why people might have on average voted higher here.
Yeah, it's like a cluster of problem cards too. I would say Blood Moon is probably more reviled, generally speaking, than Back to Basics. But Blood Moon's the one card in that set that's actually kind of a problem. Right. Versus Back to Basics is in a set with Gilded Drake and with Gaia's Cradle and Smokestack and Sarah Sanctum. Like,
Urza's Saga has so many salt-inducing cards in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And similarly, Commander 2020, like Force of Will's an amazing card, but like there's not much else in Alliances anyone cares about. Well, there's Fierce Guardianship in 2020, and there's Deflecting SWAT.
The free spells are...
there's multiple, those free spells are all very good in that cycle.
Yeah, New Phyrexia we mentioned here. In fact... And end of explanation, right? Just like some people have strong feelings about Infect, so of course New Phyrexia is going to go up. And then the Unlimited Alpha, I think, is just as a result of the huge population of cards that could be chosen there. But also, like, Counterspell, some people don't like Counterspell, and it's quintessential right there. Demonic Tutor, but also Dual Lands. Some people will see the huge prices of cards like that, and they'll be like, I don't necessarily like it. That's not the type of game I want to play, and therefore might have voted a little bit higher. Yeah. So those are all sets that stand out to me because of the cards that go into the 99, and I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff to take away from that. But it is really, really funny to me, going again back to this list of 15, to see that Urza Saga, which once again is the set that has Back to Basics and Smokestack and stuff in it, that ranks lower than Marvel's Spider-Man on this list, and that is wild.
Yes.
I think we can chalk that up to some folks are more inclined to give some random commons from the Spider-Man set a 1 out of 4 compared to the commons of your average set, like even Urza Saga, where they would give those commons and uncommons a 0 out of 4 more often. So that just raises the floor slightly for some of those sets. Urza Saga has the extreme high salty scores, but then also a lot of lows, whereas some Universes Beyond sets that don't feel high fantasy enough will get a mild simmer around even their benign cards.
Yeah, there's a lot of vibes-based voting here for sure versus like actual impact, which is nothing wrong with that. I don't mean that critically necessarily.
No, yeah.
But like, yes, the cards in Urza Saga absolutely impact like how the game is played on a mat in front of you in a way that the Spider-Man stuff definitely does not.
Right.
But I also understand the aesthetics bothering you.
Well, so it's funny you mentioned the aesthetics. I mentioned that in this poll so far, going over the sets, we excluded reprints. But Dana, if we had included reprints, you'll never believe what would show up here if we had included reprints. The Saltiest top 15 sets would also include sets like Mystery Booster 2, which has all white border cards, and Modern Horizons 1 Time Shifts, and actually Strixhaven Mystical Archive?
Which is wild.
The voting populace here apparently does not like border treatments that make things feel a little bit less like a Magic card than what they're accustomed to, is my takeaway from that information.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't either. I like looking at a Magic card and like knowing, exactly what it is, having it be recognizable. I don't love that, but it's also not particularly salty to me. I don't like it, but it's also not the kind of thing that bothers me or would make me vote for it. So I would not have guessed these sets would get those kind of votes, particularly just because of how the cards look.
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting. There's, as you said, some vibe stuff, some mechanical stuff, some commandery stuff. A lot of different things are being expressed amongst this data. So that's why we wanted to cast this this wide net with the top 15. Like, what are these sets? Because I think there's so much meat on this bone. There's a lot that you can read into about player behavior and expectations. And once again, I think it's important for us to put back in mind that this does not represent the feelings of literally all Magic playing people out there, just the people who voted for it, which is going to be a smaller amount of the population than, everyone who plays Magic.
Right.
So it's a good thing for us to be aware of, like the biases of what the population is that could have voted for this over the week that we had these polls up. So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff going in here. I loved that. I really like that. We've got even more to dig into, though, dude. For instance, there are some cards that didn't exist last year that do exist this year that people got to vote on. So how about we talk about some of the saltiest brand new cards to the format and where they're landing?
I mean, we already talked about number 1, overall rank 3 with EDHRECast. That's not at all surprising to anyone. When we previewed Salt Scores going live a couple weeks back, I even made the comment I forgot it's not already a game changer, not already a problem card, because I just started to think of it already being on that list because of those responses.
Sure.
And the other one that I had mentioned too was Storm, Force of Nature. Also not a very fun card to play against for kind of similar reasons to Vivi. So
very powerful.
Those two aren't remotely surprising to me to see them cap the list.
Yeah, they are our numbers 1 and 2 new cards, but Vivi actually lands at spot number 3 in the overall full ranking, and Storm Force of Nature lands at spot number 65 in the overall ranking. There's a big difference between them. Vivi has a salt score of 2.8 out of 4, whereas Storm has a score of 1.9 out of 4, so kind of a drop off, but 1.9 is still high.
Yeah.
And right below her is another Universes Beyond card, Deadpool trading card, who gets spot 68. And I know that Deadpool will be very sad that it's not spot 69.
Right.
But also a score of 1.9. Kind of interesting there.
I'm actually a little bit surprised Deadpool is this high. Although I guess I get it. It is kind of an annoying card to play with. You lose your commander and you are instead given something that hurts you. That always feels pretty bad. But it also one of the cards that doesn't feel like at least for me, one of the salty reasons or salty factors with Vivi and Storm is you feel like, because that's in the command zone, I'm already starting, 15 points behind, right? I've already begun the game as a deficit because they are so powerful in the zone, almost regardless of how you've brewed. Deadpool isn't that way. It's a perfectly fine commander, but I never playing against Deadpool, I never feel like I'm starting off the game behind. So I am surprised to see it as close to Storm as it is.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Just the text trading is maybe confusing. I don't know. That might be a mechanical. Sure. I can't really tell. Overall, when I'm looking at this full list and, to kind of run through it a little bit here, I guess I want people to pay attention again to the Universes Beyond of it all.
Yes.
So we mentioned Vivi and Storm and Deadpool. The next newest card that has the highest salt score is Ugin, Eye of the Storms from Dragonstorm Tarkir. After that is the Soulstone, Sephiroth, Bloodthirsty Conqueror, Valgavoth, Knuckles the Echidna.
Followed by Cosmic Spider-Man, Kefka Court Mage, Solthera the Super Void, Iron Man, Titan of Innovation, Doomsday Excruciator, and Grievous Wounds.
So if I'm doing my quick math here, of the top 15 new cards that got the highest salt scores, 9 of them are Universes Beyond cards.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lie, it's actually hard for me to gauge whether that is because people really don't like Universes Beyond, which is kind of hinted at what we saw before. But it also might just be because the population of Universes Beyond stuff that we're getting is so half of Magic now. So this might just be like, well, of course there are going to be Universes Beyond cards here. Half of Magic sets are Universes Beyond cards now, so what else would we expect to show up high there? But it is interesting to me for sure.
Yeah, none of these are like cards that you're like, why is that on this list? Like Aunt May is not on here, right?
Right, yeah.
These cards could well be all on this list if they were in universe. If these were like printed as part of a Ravnica set or part of an Innistrad set or something. If VV was a new Ralzeric card from a new Ravnica set, I would wager VV would be just as salty for the most part as VV is, as the actual Final Fantasy VV is, similar to Stormforce of Nature, similar to the Stone or Sephiroth. Like those are on this list because they are powerful cards and they disrupt the game and change game patterns. Now, maybe they wouldn't be as high if they were in-universe cards necessarily, but like these would be the ones on the list versus, something else. Like I said, like Aunt May is never going to be on this list because it's like such a weak card, even though it is a Universes Beyond card.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the stuff here, especially near the bottom of the list. Like I would have imagined that Kefka would get a higher salt score because it's forcing everyone to discard cards. Yeah. I don't like that. I would put Kefka as a higher salt score than Sephiroth, personally. That's weird to me. And yet, so there's a lot of responses to just pushed cards here, I would say. Yeah. I think people are just reacting to like, hey, we can tell that these cards are powerful, probably because Wizards wants to make, when they do these Universes Beyond collabs, they want the cards that everyone knows to be powerful and therefore iconic and therefore played to make sure that the people that they license with are really happy with the arrangement is, I think, what I'm seeing in players' feelings here when I read these results.
Yeah, that's a really good way to phrase that. Like there's a combination of both the cards being disruptive to the game and feeling a little bit, I don't know, maybe cynical is the way you'd phrase it. I'm not sure if that's right, maybe. But like they are pushed maybe artificially beyond what you'd think they would be pushed for the purposes of making sure that people that they have the IP deal with are happy with how that product is sold. So yes, I think that's a really good point. It's the combination of those two things.
And like, I realize that could sound a little bit shady to some of the folks who are designing, and like designing cards is really dang hard.
Absolutely.
And some of these feel like very organic abilities for those characters to have as well.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I don't like Deadpool necessarily, but like it is funny that he's breaking the fourth wall at the same time.
Right.
If there is this new licensing thing, if I'm designing a card, I want it to be cool because I think the character is cool too. But then there is also, of course, always going to be that pressure of like, I don't think that the people behind Final Fantasy would let me make a bad Sephiroth card either. Right. I feel like that pressure or that incentive has got to be present.
And yeah, we've all worked jobs before where like the expectation is you make the client happy, right? Like it's not an unusual thing. Right. I don't think anything less of them for having to make these cards, feel really powerful and be really intriguing to people who are buying packs and buying these sets.
Yeah, yeah. It does strike me, the example of Sephiroth being higher than Kefka, for instance. I don't think the phrase people dislike Universes Beyond is really a comprehensive enough reading of these results. So I hope that folks out there can see a bigger complexity lying behind these numbers.
Yeah.
I really want to hammer this nuance home that what it seems that people are responding to here is cards that are pushed and powerful. Like even going back to some of the sets data, Aether as an example, was not a beloved set by the Magic community. A lot of people disliked it, called it a crappy set. But guess what? It's the number one set with the lowest average salt score, 0.17. Mm-hmm. People saw cards from that set and voted a whole lot of zeros in the salt pollings. Now, that doesn't mean that they loved the whole set. We'll do another episode going all of the results of that stuff later. Don't you worry. Yeah. But rather, I just think that data point really reinforces what we're talking about here, that what players responded to this year was power. They reacted to pushed cards, which Aether kind of didn't seem to have to their perception, It made a low impression on people this year, so it got tiny scores compared to all of the other cards out there that felt really uber powerful this year. So those are the ones that seem to pull focus. And connecting all of these threads, it just so happens that, when Universes Beyond is involved, there's clearly an active concern from players that some of these characters, that some of these cards are more pushed than they would have been otherwise. I'm not saying that's definitely always the case. Again, we had Nadu last year, and that's 100% Magic IP. But I think that is the player perception that I'm sussing out from these data. And as we were just saying, it isn't hard to imagine how corporate realities and incentives and pressures and lack of thorough playtesting time all contribute to standout pushed cards that come from Universes Beyond sets, which are making up half the population of the cards out there anyway.
Sure.
So anyway, I hope that doesn't all sound like shade to any individual or specific designer or anything. I promise I'm just trying to recognize the water that we're all swimming in. And this year, I think an important part of the conversation ought to be that it isn't just Universes Beyond as the talking point, but actually powerful pushed cards. And it seems like everyone is going around checking for what the things are that cause the power and the pushed cards to become a reality. Because when the reasons feel less artistic and more corporate, clearly that's something that engaged Magic players really don't vibe with.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Archidekt, the very best Commander deck building website. We house all of our decks on Archidekt, which you can find linked in all of our episodes, or go to archidekt.com/EDHRECast. And by now, you've probably heard of my favorite feature on Archidekt, dragging and dropping directly from Scryfall or EDHREC right into your deck list, saving you tons of time on typing out your card choices when you're updating your list. And you probably also know that Archidekt's playtester is the very best in the biz, smoothly starting each new turn with a swift draw and untap, easily grouping and tapping things en masse if you need it, making searches and scries super simple, proliferating a bunch of counters with just one click of a button, and more. But did you also know about its playtester logs feature? Archidekt can track stats during your playtests, noting such data as your number of cards drawn each turn or number of mana producers played each turn, so you can see how often you're hitting your land drops or how many extra cards that you draw, and on what turns you're most likely to start drawing extra cards. I just playtested a +1 counters deck to see how much total power it could accrue on the field, and Archidekt tracked for me that I got up to 48 power by turn 6. Such easy access to a detailed recap of your playtests can help you get in tune with how your deck really works, or help you locate its weak spots, and all those little edges and extra bits of knowledge could make all the difference to make you more successful at your next game night. Check out our decks at archidekt.com/EDHRECast, that's ARCHIDEKT.com/EDHRECast, and thanks again to Archidekt for constantly innovating and for sponsoring the show. Now, Dana, there actually have been some other shakeups this year as well, including the invention of Game Changers and some cards that got unbanned and moved into Game Changers. So let's look now at the data for the cards that were recently unbanned. I have been really interested in where those cards are falling. Braid's Cabal Minion, Sway of the Stars, Gifts Ungiven, and Coalition Victory, and Panoptic Mirror were all unbanned this year. Where are they falling on the SALT score? Because crucially, you may notice they didn't appear in our top 15. So where actually did they land?
They did not. Braids is the highest here. Braids Cabal Minion at 32, followed by Sway of the Stars at 97. And then it's a pretty steep drop for those last three that are showing up here. Gifts Ungiven, Coalition Victory, and Panoptic Mirror are all in the 300 range. Gifts at 303, Coalition Victory at 342, and Panoptic Mirror at 384.
Yeah, we're seeing a SALT score of 2.2 on Braids, but then only 1.7 on Sway, and then 1.2 and lower for Gifts and Coalition and Panoptic Mirror. I feel like this is a sign that them being unbanned and moved to Game Changer status seems pretty okay with a lot of people, because they're not ranking super wildly high in a way that would indicate to me that they are really messing up a lot of games out there since they're unbanning.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before in the past. Like, we talked about our guess about how these cards would wind up shaking out on this list, and we've talked about just like the advent of the bracket system freeing up a lot of these things. Mm-hmm. It's just so much easier to dodge these things with the way the bracket system works than it once was. You know, Braids, I think, would have been a much larger problem pre-bracket system, where like you could just see it anywhere, whereas now, it being a game changer, like, oh, I'm just in bracket 2, I'm never going to see it. And even in bracket 3, it's probably much less likely, given it's competing with cards that are generally like better in a kind of average sense than Braids is, which is a specifically good card in a very specific deck.
So, honestly, the one that is most surprising to me is Sway of the Stars, being within the top 100.
Yeah.
It having a SALT score of 1.7 out of 4. I genuinely think that Sway of Stars could not be a game changer. It is just like, yeah, it's an annoying effect. I think that's what people are registering, is that it's annoying, but it doesn't seem to have the same scores as a lot of the other cards that we've noticed so far that got high scores because of how powerful they are. And I think that ends up being my takeaway here.
And that's the thing that's always been part of the SALT scores, is the perception or reputation or theoretical status of a card versus the reality. Like Tabernacle of Pendra Vale is always in the top 10 saltiest cards list. And 99% of people who are giving that a high salt score have never played against a Tabernacle. Like just because it's a card that, there's like 9,000 copies in existence, and sure, people can proxy it, but you just don't see the card show up that much. Sway the Stars is the same deal here. I understand when folks don't like it and want to give it a salt score, but they're not calling it a salty card because they see it and it caused a problem at their table. They just know what it could conceptually do and are giving it a score because of that. It's not something that the average player ever actually sees.
Yeah. And a card like Braids, here, it's showing up exactly where we thought it would. It is pretty darn annoying to have to sacrifice stuff all the time to her effect. If anything, I might have expected that Gifts Ungiven would be a lot higher because of the cards that were unbanned that I think could do the most amount of damage in the bracket 3 space that a Game Changer will be assigned to. Gifts Ungiven would be the one where I'm just like, ooh, are you setting up something that maybe you shouldn't be? And yet, it's spaced down within the 300s. Feels like a pretty decent sign. So I've got my eyes on them, but some of those are not as high as I thought they would be, which I take as a good signal.
Yeah, I would wager there's more copies of Gifts in decks than there are the other 4 combined on that list.
Yeah, probably.
But it winds up, in the middle of the pack because of just probably the reputation of Braids and reputation or the theoretical problems that Sway could present.
So those were the cards that were unbanned and turned into Game Changers. What about the other cards that were already assigned as Game Changers? Let's get to that list now. We mentioned a few within the top 15 already, like Tergrid, God of Fright, and Ristic Study, and you even just mentioned Tabernacle as well. Yep. Thassa's Oracle, Grand Arbiter, Smothering Tithe. The One Ring is up here. These ones highest on the list, the ones we just named, they've all got salt scores of 2.5 or higher. These all are landing not just within the top 100 saltiest cards, but within the top 50. In fact, there are actually 34 Game Changers that land within the top 100 saltiest cards in the format, so a full third of the top 100 is devoted to Game Changers. It's kind of interesting then, the ones that are lowest on the list, Gamble, Crop Rotation, Worldly Tutor, and Enlightened Tutor are the Game Changers that have the lowest salt scores. They each have a salt score of 1.1 or lower. All told, the Game Changers have a mean average salt score of 1.8 out of 4 and a median of 1.7. And remember for context that this is on a scale of 0 to 4, and that the number 1 saltiest card, which is Stasis, that one has a salt score of 3.25. So I hope with all these numbers, that kind of helps give some sense of space and scale for where everything is landing.
And even the cards that are absent from this list and aren't like necessarily officially a game changer are kind of in a way because they fall into some category that wouldn't be present in a bracket where you can play game, like so Stasis and Winter Orb, for example, qualifying as land disruption or land denial, however you want to phrase that, is something that, while not being a game changer, also isn't going to show up in bracket 2. So in a way, they kind of are on the game changer list despite not actually being tagged with that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. In a previous episode, we had actually kind of speculated whether the assignment of these cards as game changers might affect their salt voting. And what is most interesting to me is that there is basically no effect at all. There were like a couple of small adjustments, like Tergrid increased from a 2.7 to a 2.8.
Right.
Stuff like that. But just as many also went downward. Like the One Ring went from 2.7 to 2.5 this year. And then a whole bunch of them stayed the same. Fierce Guardianship is still at 2.3. Grand Arbiter held at 2.57 for both of the past years. So like, it's interesting to me that these basically didn't do a whole lot of shifting, even though they got a lot of extra attention and even a whole label, a whole category to them. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so one of the things we had talked about on our like previous show about this was wondering whether or not some of these cards would fall down a little bit because of the way the Game Changer list works. You're just not going to see them as much anymore. You're not going to get a Winter Orb sprung on you out of nowhere, and perhaps that would make it less salty. Well, maybe it has, I guess, in theory, but it's not suddenly going to change people's responses to it. Like I said, we always had Tabernacle being a top 6, top 5, top 6 card, despite nobody really seeing it in play.
Yeah.
So it really, I guess, removing Winter Orb from something that you have to worry about in bracket 2 might make it less impactful, but it's still going to be a salty card for the same reason Tabernacle is still going to be a salty card. Not seeing it doesn't change the fact that you have a visceral response to that card.
Yeah, I guess I'm glad that was the mindset for a lot of players out there. It didn't feel like them getting a special label felt like now we must approach them differently. It feels like players maintained exactly the same frame of mind that they had before these cards were labeled as anything in particular. And that is just an interesting, cool, a nice thing to read about Commander players, I guess. This brings me to our final data point here, which is basically looking at Salt over the years, you could say. We've done a couple of these episodes now. We've done a couple of these polls now. And I'm kind of curious about the trends that we see with whether things like, is the Salt score on average going up over time, or is it going down over time? Like, how are people responding to each year? And to see what that maybe might tell us about the releases of past years. So we're going to throw one last graph on the screen for everybody here. The average Salt score of the entire population of Magic cards over time. Again, we're talking every single card from Tergrid to Mountain. So this is a whole lot. The Salt score is actually very, very low on average. 0.29 for the entire population is what we see as the score in 2022. But then it rose up quite a bit in 2023 to 0.35, shrunk way back down again in 2024 to just 0.2. And then here in 2025, the average Salt score across all cards ended up being 0.29. In case that helps give you a frame of reference for other cards when you see their Salt scores on EDHREC, if you see something that is a 2, even though it's just 2 out of 4, it is actually quite high because the average card is scoring at a 0.29. But yeah, we saw a big surge in 2023, a shrink down in 2024, and it's come back up again here in 2025.
I would have guessed we would have continued a downward trend again just because of the bracket system. I would have thought, okay, Winter Orb's still going to be the saltiest saltiest card. Stasis still going to be one of the saltiest cards. But maybe everything would drop a little bit because people are just not having to worry about seeing those. And things didn't do that. They swung back up. And the Universes Beyond factor, I feel like, probably is the main reason for that. This was the year where we really got a bunch of those. And as we saw from our numbers, folks had a very polarizing reaction to the amount of UB sets. So my guess is that's the reason for that swing back up.
That's exactly what I was going to say too. I think this is the data that we've seen, especially going over the sets stuff that we did earlier on in the episode, feels to me as though a lot of the players who are online wanted to express their frustration about the direction that the game is going. And that's, again, something that I think is reinforced by what we see here. It is curious to me that the numbers in 2023 were higher than even they are now in 2025. I think that is a fascinating spike and is possibly owed to the reality of like Praetors and March of the Machine cards that released at that time, as well as the One Ring and Orcish Bowmasters. And I think also the timing lines up here where Unfinity's late release in 2022 were things that people had not voted on, and then in 2023 all those cards were there, and I think that all of that kind of rolled into 2023's voting, therefore included a lot of those types of cards that pushed the numbers up. There wasn't nearly anything quite as much happening like that in 2024. But then here over the past year, we've seen the shape of the game take a very different direction than a lot of players enjoy and are accustomed to, at least within the population that we're seeing here. The frame of the game that they seem to enjoy the most is changing. And this feels to me like a reaction to the fact that things are changing.
Yeah, and one thing I'll be curious about is to see if that trend continues or if just getting so many of these is something people become accustomed to and it ceases to impact how they vote. Because like I said, this was the first year where we really had this surge where it feels like, it's a 50-50 split, and next year is feeling like it might even be more heavily into UB. So I wonder what the response to that is, because it doesn't seem like folks are necessarily quitting because of it. They're just annoyed. So I wonder how that, this is a good outlet, right? If you're mad about UB stuff but you don't want to quit Magic because you love playing EDH, you love playing Magic, but it's not enough to make you quit. Well, this gives you a way to voice your displeasure to a degree while not having to quit playing the game you love.
My hope for this as it goes on, I hope to see that it does eventually start to trend downward, because I think there is just honestly no escaping that this is the new normal. And I really don't want folks who are newer to the game and who got in through like Doctor Who or even Spider-Man or whatever to feel like they are immediately alienated from a whole group of nerds that they wanted to game with. That is my hugest fear whenever I'm looking over all of this. A lot of people have strong opinions about Universes Beyond. We've expressed that we're like not necessarily feeling all that strong about it ourselves. There are some properties that really do resonate with us, and that's something that I want to key into. We loved the Lord of the Rings and the Final Fantasy set. I loved the Final Fantasy set, even despite trying to distance myself from it. I couldn't. It dragged me back in. The cards are really fun. And so I hope that like the fact that there are indeed people coming into the game this way, I hope that they do stay. And if those folks do stay, and then they start joining in on the votes as well, I hope that that starts to reflect in the data too, that as the size of this gets bigger and a lot more people are entering the game from a lot of different areas, I hope they stick around, and then we can see, you know, that they also participate in all of the cool stuff that we do in the community here. But this is definitely signs of growing pains, because it is quite a big change that a lot of us are not used to. So that's a lot of that, I feel like, has been reflected in the data we've gone over today.
Yeah, and I don't want to be dismissive. I hope I didn't come across that way about people that don't like the UB sets. Like, I completely get that to a degree. It's just, for me personally, like, I love playing Magic so much that me not liking seeing, you know, random Spider-Man villains on cards is just not going to make it, it's not going to scare me away. Like, I'm still going to play Magic because, like, I love playing EDH and Magic so much that me not liking a card or not liking the fact that Hasbro's leaning so heavily into these other properties that pay their bills. I get why that's frustrating to people. I'm not telling you you're wrong at all either. I've just made a choice to accept it because I like playing Magic, and this is the medicine that you have to take to get better. Right? Like that's, it's just, it is what it is. So I've accepted it, but I also get the pushback. I just hope people, I don't know, learn to see the upside too, of whether it's new players coming in or existing players. We know plenty of existing players that like are huge Doctor Who fans.
Fallout fans, like whatever.
Yeah, Final Fantasy, whatever, like, and are to the moon to see their favorite property represented, or like, think about the Star Trek people that you know that are going to be crazy over Star Trek stuff when you know we get those kind of cards. So I'm hoping that people maybe soften a little bit on it, even if they don't like it. They can recognize that some people absolutely love this stuff, and that's good for them and probably good for the game long term, even if it is being done to sell packs.
I personally wager, I hope I'm reading the right good faith argument in the results that we're seeing here, that players are never going to take any of this frustration out on someone else who sidled up to the table with one of those Fallout decks or one of those, you know, any of those. Like, that person who got into the game that way, we all know that that's really cool. And even if we don't personally like that property that did have that crossover, that's not on that person. Rather, a lot of the stuff that we see getting higher salt scores, even down to the fact that Vivi is like number 3 right here, taking the spot of Nadu from last year. The things that players seem to be responding to are those moments where it feels like we've got those corporate fingers all over some stuff. Like, hey, we had to make sure that we push this to make sure that the product sells. Yeah. Like, people are voting higher for a Sephiroth, which was clearly like pushed to be a strong card, compared to Kefka, which is making people discard a lot of cards in their hand, which I personally find to be much more of an issue in gameplay, in casual social gameplay. So it feels to me like the salt score swinging back to sort of an equilibrium, going a little bit higher here in 2025, or the scores that we've seen on some of these cards, they all reflect to me a way of players communicating frustration with the corporate fingers all over stuff compared to any expression towards other players. That is what I'm personally reading here, and I think that's a pretty nice thing to take away from folks. We can be, when we say people don't like Universes Beyond, what we mean is the corporate incentives that are causing things to change in the game for reasons that aren't just an artist getting to express themselves. And that's what it feels like to me players are responding to. I hope that that's a good way to frame what I think is the frustration expressed in some of these results. Yeah, no, I like that wording for sure. Dana, this has been so much data. We didn't even challenge this out this episode because there's so much new data that we're going over. So the folks, let us know what all of your thoughts are about all of this stuff. What is your least favorite set? What is your most loved set? We only went over the results here of a bunch of that stuff that got higher salt scores, but maybe down the line we'll get to showcase some of the stuff that players actually seem to enjoy more, for instance. But yeah, let us know your thoughts about all of this data. Please enjoy going over the numbers. Again, check out the YouTube if you're just on the podcast. If you're just listening on the 405 or whatever, I really recommend going to the video to check out all the graphs and stuff here, because it's very interesting stuff. Hit us up with your takes on it. But Dana, for now, I think you and I have got to sign off and go play some Magic maybe. I don't know. Right, so, absolutely, yeah. Where is it that folks can find you on the onlines? You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC. And you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast. And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz online, and you can find the cast online at EDHRECast. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with even more data and insights, but until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.